The neural probe slid into Corporal HFY's skull with the wet sound of tearing flesh. Blood trickled down his temple as the Velthari interrogator, its 6 spider-like limbs clicking against the metal floor, leaned closer with what passed for anticipation in its species. Finally, the creature hissed through its translator, mandibles spreading wide, a human mind to dissect. Caius had been captured 3 days ago during the failed assault on Nexus Station. His Squad 12 of the finest Marines in the Terran colonial force had been reduced to scattered atoms by Velthari energy weapons. Only he remained, strapped to this chair in the bowels of their command ship, electrodes boring into his brain like hungry parasites. The interrogator's name was Scrixtel, and it had spent the better part of 2 centuries perfecting the art of mental domination. Humans were a new species to the galactic stage, barely worthy of notice except for their stubborn refusal to submit to superior civilizations. Today, Scrixtel would change that. Your primitive neural pathways fascinate me. Scrixtel clicked, adjusting dials on a console that hummed with alien frequencies. So simple, so malleable. The probe sent lightning through Caius's brain. His body convulsed against the restraints, muscles screaming as foreign thoughts began to whisper at the edges of his consciousness. The Velthari's mind control technology had subjugated dozens of species across the galaxy. No sentient being had ever resisted it for more than minutes, but Scrixtel had never encountered a human brain before. The initial contact felt like drowning in static. Caius's memories boot camp on Mars, his first kill on Epsilon Prime. The faces of his dead squad mates flickered past like old film reels. The alien presence pressed deeper, seeking the control centers, the switches that would turn this defiant warrior into a puppet. Instead, it found something else entirely: human brains. Scrixtel discovered the late were chaos engines. Evolution had wired them for contradiction, logic, and madness, sharing the same neural highways. Love and hate firing through identical synapses where other species had neat, orderly thought patterns. Humans possessed a labyrinth of misfiring neurons, suppressed traumas, and controlled insanity that their own scientists barely understood. The probe recoiled as it encountered Caius's deepest memories. Not just the violence, though there was plenty of that, but the context. The Marine had once spent 6 hours talking to a suicidal teenager off a bridge on Earth. The same hands that had strangled a Velthari scout with piano wire had gently held his dying mother during her final breaths. Scrixtel's mandibles clicked in confusion. How could a mind hold such contradictions without fragmenting? Interesting specimen. It muttered to its assistant, a smaller Velthari named Nexavara. Increase the neural pressure. This one has unusual resilience. The machine's hum intensified. Caius's body arched against the restraints as the alien presence invaded deeper, trying to establish dominance over his motor functions. For a moment, success seemed within reach. His left hand twitched involuntarily, fingers dancing to Scrixtel's mental commands. Then something shifted. Where the Velthari expected to find surrender, it instead discovered that Caius had been studying the connection. The human brain, with its chaotic architecture, didn't just resist the control, it adapted to it. Neural pathways that had never existed before began forming in real time, creating feedback loops that turned the probe's own energy against itself. HFY smiled for the first time in 3 days. What? Scrixtel began, but the word died as it felt its own thoughts begin to echo strangely. The human's mind wasn't just resisting anymore. It was learning, absorbing, and then, impossibly, it began to push back. The neural probe, designed to be a one-way conduit of control, suddenly became a highway running in both directions. Caius felt the alien shock ripple through the connection, tasted its growing fear as it realized what was happening. Humans didn't just resist mind control, they weaponized it. The feedback struck Scrixtel like a psychic sledgehammer, its 6 limbs spasming, claws scraping against the metal floor as Caius's consciousness surged through the neural link. With the force of a dam burst, the interrogators carefully ordered millennia of telepathic training, and mental discipline crumbled under the chaotic assault of human thought patterns. Nexavara chittered in alarm, watching its superior convulse as sparks flew from the mind control apparatus. Scrixtel, the neural feedback is shut it down. The interrogator screamed, its voice box crackling with static as Caius's memories flooded its consciousness. The human's experiences came not as gentle streams, but as torrents of sensory overload. The acrid smell of gunpowder, the weight of dead comrades, the terrible beauty of orbital bombardments. painting alien skies on fire, but HFY as Claus hesitated. Over the emergency controls. Something was wrong. The human's vital signs weren't spiking, they were stabilizing. His neural activity wasn't chaotic anymore. It was focused, predatory. Caius felt the exact moment when Scrixtel's mental defenses collapsed. The alien's mind laid itself bare before him like an open book, revealing not just thoughts, but the entire network of Velthari command structure aboard the ship. He could see through the interrogator's memories. 4 to 7 crew members, 12 of them warriors, the rest technicians and support staff. More importantly, he could feel their locations through the ship's internal sensors. The restraints holding him to the chair were controlled by the same system, with surgical precision. Caius sent a spike of concentrated rays through the neural link. Scrixtel shrieked and collapsed, its limbs folding inward as its nervous system overloaded. The feedback surge fried the mind control apparatus in a shower of sparks and alien screams. The magnetic clamps holding Caius released with metallic clicks. HFY lunged for the alarm, but the human was already moving. 3 days of captivity had left him weak, but 4 years of marine training had made certain movements muscle memory. His fist caught the smaller Velthari in what passed for its throat, crushing the cartilage structure that housed its voice box. The creature went down gurgling, 6 limbs twitching as it suffocated on its own fluids. Caius knelt beside Scrixtel's convulsing form and placed his hands on the creature's elongated skull. The neural probe was dead, but the psychic connection remained a two-way bridge that the aliens had never intended to create. "Let me show you something," he whispered, his voice hoarse from days of screaming. Through the link, he fed Scrixtel every memory of human warfare he could dredge up, not just his own experiences, but humanity's collective history of violence. Stalingrad, Hiroshima, the Martian Independence War, the brutal suppression of the Titan mining rebellion, a species that had perfected the art of killing its own kind. For millennia before ever reaching the stars, Scrixtel's mind shattered like glass. The interrogator's death throes triggered proximity alarms throughout the detention bay. Caius could hear the chittering of approaching Velthari guards through the bulkheads, at least 6 of them, moving fast. He had perhaps 90 seconds before they breached the interrogation chamber. The room held little in the way of weapons, but Marines learned to improvise. He tore the neural probe from his skull, ignoring the fresh surge of blood, and snapped off the metal tip. The makeshift blade wasn't much, but it would punch through a Velthari's soft underbelly with enough force behind it. The first guard through the door died before it realized the prisoner was free. Caius's improvised weapon slid between its carapace plates like a key finding its lock, piercing the creature's primary heart. The guard's death scream alerted its companions, but also created the opening he needed. Velthari weapons were biometrically locked, but their armor wasn't. Caius stripped the dead guard's protection in seconds, the chitinous plates sliding over his human frame like ill-fitting scales. The weapon itself was useless to him, but the armor would stop at least a few energy blasts. The remaining guards burst through the doorway in a coordinated rush, energy rifles crackling with lethal charge. But they expected to find a weakened prisoner, not an armored predator who had spent 3 days studying their movement patterns. Through their commander's memories, Caius rolled behind the interrogation chair as energy bolts seared the air where he'd been standing. The weapon fire turned the chair into molten slag, but also gave him the distraction he needed to close distance. The Velthari were excellent shots at range, but their spider-like physiology made them clumsy in close quarters. His hands found the throat of the nearest guard, fingers digging into the soft tissue beneath his mandibles. The creature's dying screams filled the chamber as Caius used its body as a shield against its companion's desperate fire. For guards down to remaining, the survivors tried to retreat, chittering commands to seal the detention bay, but Caius had absorbed too much from Scrixtel's mind, learned too many of their tactical patterns. He knew they would fall back to defensive positions, knew they would call for reinforcements. He also knew exactly where the ship's command center was located. "Commander." Velkorath's mandibles clicked in growing agitation as the security feeds from the detention bay went dark one by one. The human prisoner Caius Vex, according to the interrogation files, had somehow broken free and was systematically dismantling his guards with nothing but improvised weapons and stolen armor. "How is this possible?" Velkorath hissed, his 6 limbs drumming against the command console in patterns of barely controlled fury. Scrixtel assured me the mind probe would reduce the human to a drooling puppet within hours. His tactical officer, Zixandra, manipulated holographic displays. With rapid claw movements, "The interrogator is dead, Commander." Neural feedback through the psychic link appears to have caused catastrophic brain damage. The human seems to have absorbed its knowledge. Absorbed? BlackHFY's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Explain." Security recordings show the prisoner demonstrating detailed knowledge of ship layouts and crew positions. He's moving through the detention level as if he served aboard this vessel for cycles. The only possible explanation is an explosion echoed through the ship's hull, cutting off her words. Emergency lighting bathed the command center in pulsing red as bulkheads groaned under stress. "Report," BlackHFY snapped. "Detention Bay 7 has been breached," came the panicked voice of a junior technician. The human used overloaded energy cells to blast through the primary containment doors. He's moving toward the armory. The commander's mandibles spread wide in what humans might have recognized as a predatory smile. "Seal all passages to the weapon storage. Deploy security teams Alpha through Delta. I want that primitive captured alive." But BlackHFY was no longer thinking like a prisoner. The psychic link with Scrixtel had given him something more valuable than freedom. It had provided him with 3 days' worth of the interrogator's memories, including detailed schematics of Velthari technology and tactical doctrine. He knew their weapons were biometrically locked. He also knew their weakness. The armory's blast doors were sealed, but the ventilation system wasn't. Velthari physiology required precisely controlled atmospheric mixtures, meaning their environmental systems were both sophisticated and vulnerable. Caius had learned from Scrixtel's memories that the ship's air recycling plant contained chemical compounds that would become violently unstable if mixed in the wrong proportions. 20 minutes later, the armory's interior atmosphere ignited in a controlled explosion that blew the blast doors off their hinges. While leaving the weapons inside intact, Caius stepped through the smoking wreckage wearing a full combat suit of Velthari battle armor, energy rifles slung across his shoulders and bandoliers of plasma grenades strapped to his chest. The stolen memories had taught him how to bypass the biometric locks. Security teams Alpha and Beta are no longer responding, Zixandra reported, her voice tight with something that might have been fear. "The human has acquired military-grade equipment. He's hunting our people." BlackHFY watched the tactical display as red icons representing his crew members winked out one by one. The human moved through the ship like a ghost, using maintenance shafts and service corridors that even his own crew barely knew existed. Worse, he seemed to anticipate their defensive positions before they could establish them. "He's reading our tactical patterns," the commander realized with growing horror. Scrixtel's memories gave him access to our entire strategic database. Another explosion rocked the ship, this one much closer to the command center, through the security feeds. They watched BlackHFY emerge from a cloud of smoke and debris, his stolen armor scorched, but intact. Bodies lay scattered around him, the remains of Security Team Gamma, reduced to scattered limbs and leaking fluids. "Commander," Zixandra's voice cracked like brittle ice. "He's headed for engineering. If he reaches the reactor core, I know what he's planning." BlackHFY cut her off. The human wasn't just escaping. He was preparing to destroy the entire ship, taking all hands with him rather than allow his captors to survive. It was a level of vindictive calculation that the Velthari had never encountered in a supposedly primitive species. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel to the escape pods," he ordered. "Seal the engineering section and flood it with neurotoxin gas, sir. That will kill Chief Engineer Nick Soppel and his entire team. Better them than all of us." BlackHFY's mandibles clicked with grim finality. "Do it." But Caius had anticipated this move as well. Through Scrixtel's memories, he knew the location of every emergency system aboard the ship. Instead of heading directly to engineering, he made a detour to the life support center. The Velthari crew was just beginning to flood the engineering section with poison gas when their atmospheric controls went haywire. Caius had introduced a virulent strain of Terran bacteria into their air recycling system, organisms that thrive on the precise chemical mixture the aliens required to breathe. Within minutes, the ship's atmosphere began to turn toxic to its own crew. Emergency protocols activated. The ship's AI announced in its emotionless mechanical voice, "Atmospheric contamination detected. All personnel report to emergency life support stations." But there were only so many emergency stations, and Caius knew the location of every single one. as panicked Velthari rushed through the corridors, gasping for breath through improvised filters. They found their safe havens had been systematically sabotaged. The human wasn't just killing them. He was suffocating them slowly, forcing them to experience the same helpless terror he had endured during 3 days of torture. BlackHFY watched his crew die through the security monitors, their bodies convulsing as alien bacteria consumed the air in their lungs. The command center's independent life support would keep his senior staff alive for perhaps another hour. After that, they would join the growing collection of corpses scattered throughout his ship. BlackHFY's tactical display resembled a battlefield morgue. Of his original crew of 47, only 11 remained alive, barricaded in the command center while toxic bacteria slowly consumed their ship's atmosphere. The human had turned their own technology against them with a precision that spoke of intimate knowledge of Velthari systems. He's not trying to escape anymore, Zixandra observed, her mandibles clicking nervously as she monitored the remaining security feeds. He's systematically eliminating every possible avenue of survival. This isn't a breakout, it's an extermination. Through the command center's armored viewport, they could see the rest of the fleet maintaining formation around their flagship. 200 Velthari vessels, the largest military force their species had ever assembled, preparing for the final assault on humanity's core worlds. None of them realized their flagship had been compromised by a single prisoner. BlackHFY activated his personal communicator, preparing to signal for emergency evacuation. But the channel filled with static. The human had somehow jammed their communications array. They were cut off, isolated aboard a ship that was rapidly becoming their tomb. There, Zixandra pointed to a security monitor showing Corridor 7. He's moving toward the command level. Caius Vex appeared on screen, still wearing the stolen battle armor, but now carrying weapons the Velthari had never seen before. He had spent the last hour in their fabrication bay, using Scrixtel's technical knowledge to modify their energy weapons into something far more lethal. The rifle in his hands hummed with unstable power, jury-rigged components glowing white-hot, as they channeled more energy than they were designed to contain. It was a suicide weapon, something that would probably kill its user along with its targets. But the human didn't seem to care about survival anymore. He cared about making them pay. The first blast door leading to the command center disintegrated under concentrated fire. Molten metal showered the corridor as Caius advanced through the breach, his modified weapon already cycling for another shot. The backup blast door lasted 30 seconds longer before suffering the same fate. Defensive positions, BlackHFY barked, though his remaining crew was hardly equipped for ground combat. His bridge officers were technicians and navigators, not warriors. Their sidearms would barely scratch the human's stolen armor. Caius appeared in the command center's entrance. Like a vengeful ghost, energy weapon trained on the huddled Velthari. Smoke rose from his armor where the superheated components had begun to burn through the protective plating. Blood trickled from beneath his helmet. The makeshift weapon was cooking him alive. Even as he wielded it, "You tortured me for 3 days, he said, his voice distorted by the helmet's speakers but clearly audible. "Let me return the favor." The first shot took Security Chief Vaxel in the thorax, vaporizing his carapace and most of his internal organs. The second caught Navigator Pixinda as she tried to reach an emergency alarm, reducing her to scattered chitin and boiling fluids. But instead of finishing them quickly, Caius adjusted his weapon's power settings. The next blast caught Communications Officer Nextrol in the legs, severing them at the joints but leaving him alive to scream. The human was torturing them as they had tortured him, slowly, methodically, savoring their terror. "You wanted to study human psychology," Caius continued, advancing into the center of the command deck. "Here's your lesson. We don't forget, we don't forgive, and we don't die quietly." Zixandra lunged for a fallen sidearm, but Caius's next shot caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her into a control console. She lay there twitching, her primary nervous system damaged but not severed, forced to watch as he continued his methodical execution of her crewmates. "Please," BlackHFY clicked, his mandibles spread in a gesture of submission that no human would recognize. "We were following orders. The High Command demanded information about your species' weaknesses. We meant no personal." The rifle's muzzle pressed against the commander's elongated skull, the superheated metal searing through his exoskeleton. "Personal," Caius laughed, and the sound was worse than his rage had been. "You put probes in my brain. You tried to turn me into a puppet." You made me watch my squad die while you dissected their memories for intelligence data. He leaned closer, his helmet's visor reflecting the commander's terrified face. This couldn't be more personal. The final shot painted the command center's viewport with Vel'Korath's remains. Caius stood alone among the corpses, his jury-rigged weapon finally beginning to smoke and spark as its components reached critical failure. Around him, the ship's systems continued their death spiral, life support failing, hull integrity compromised, reactor containment beginning to fluctuate. He had perhaps 10 minutes before the whole vessel tore itself apart, but instead of seeking escape, he made his way to the communications array. The jamming field he'd activated could be reversed, turned into a powerful transmitter that would broadcast on all Velthari military frequencies. His helmet's recorder had captured everything. Throughout the fleet, 200 Velthari captains watched in stunned silence as their screens filled with images from their flagship's command center. They saw their species' greatest interrogator reduced to a convulsing wreck by human neural feedback. They watched a single prisoner systematically hunt down and execute an entire crew with nothing but improvised weapons and stolen knowledge. Most importantly, they heard Caius Vex's final message, broadcast across every military channel in the fleet. My name is Corporal Caius Vex, Terran Colonial Marines. I want every one of you Xeno bastards to remember this face, because it's the last thing 47 of your people saw before they died screaming. You think humans are primitives. You think we're weak. He gestured to the carnage around him, his stolen armor beginning to glow cherry red as the ship's reactor finally destabilized. Come to Earth. Try to conquer us. But know that for every human you kill, 1,000 of you will die. We are not prey animals. We are the apex predators of a world that tried to kill us for 4 million years and failed. The transmission cut off as the flagship's reactor breached containment, consuming the vessel in a miniature star that briefly outshone the system's primary sun. Fleet Admiral Kixtharo watched the expanding plasma cloud that had once been her flagship with mandibles spread in disbelief, 200 vessels strong, the largest armada in Velthari history, and they had just lost their command ship to a single human prisoner. The implications were staggering and terrifying. All vessels maintain formation, she broadcast from her new flagship, the dreadnought piercing darkness. Continue on course for the Sol system. One human cannot. Her words died as proximity alarms shrieked across the bridge. The tactical display lit up like a festival of death, showing hundreds of new contacts emerging from hyperspace around their position. Human ships arriving in perfect formation as if they had been waiting for exactly this moment. Admiral Helena Cross stood on the bridge of the TCS Retribution, her weathered face set in lines of granite determination. The Velthari transmission had reached Earth's defensive fleet just as she'd hoped it would. Caius Vex's sacrifice had given them something beyond tactical intelligence. It had provided them with the enemy's exact location and formation. All ships, this is Admiral Cross, she broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. Corporal Vex has shown us what these Xeno bastards really are. They torture prisoners. They use mind control. They think we're primitive animals to be caged and studied. Her voice hardened to forged steel. Today we show them what happens when you corner a predator. The Terran fleet emerged from hyperspace in a coordinated assault formation that would have been impossible without precise knowledge of the enemy's position. 150 human warships, everything Earth's colonies could muster, armed with weapons designed specifically for this engagement. The battle began in silence. As most space combat did, energy beams and kinetic projectiles crossed the void at appreciable fractions of the speed of light, followed seconds later by the brilliant flashes of matter converting to energy. The first exchange of fire lasted only moments, but it claimed a dozen ships from both sides. The Velthari had superior numbers and more advanced energy shields, but the humans had something their enemies couldn't anticipate. They fought like Caius Vex, with desperate fury and calculated brutality that turned every engagement into a knife fight. Captain Marcus Torres guided his heavy cruiser Vanguard directly into the enemy formation, ignoring the energy beams that carved glowing furrows in his ship's armor. His target was a Velthari battleship 3 times his vessel's mass, its weapons arrays glowing with enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. All power to forward guns, he ordered, feeling the deck plates vibrate as his ship's massive railguns charged. Ram speed. If we're going down, we're taking them with us. The Vanguard and the Velthari battleship Endless Void collided at a combined velocity. That turned both vessels into expanding debris clouds, but not before Torres managed to fire every weapon in his arsenal directly into the enemy ship's reactor core, creating a chain reaction that consumed 6 nearby vessels in sympathetic explosions. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human captains chose death before retreat. The destroyer Prometheus launched its entire complement of nuclear warheads at point-blank range, sacrificing itself to crack open a Velthari carrier. The frigate Liberty rammed the enemy cruiser at full acceleration, its captain's final transmission. A single word, Vex, but the Velthari were learning to. Admiral Kixthara watched the human tactics evolve in real time and adapted her own strategy accordingly. Where the humans used suicide runs, she deployed long-range bombardment. Where they closed for knife fights, she pulled back and used their aggression against them. Focus fire on their command vessels, she ordered, her mandibles clicking with cold calculation. Humans are pack animals. Cut off the head and the body dies. The concentrated fire of 50 Velthari ships converged on the TCS Retribution, overwhelming its shields and carving through armor plating like a cutting torch through paper. Admiral Cross felt her flagship dying around her, bulkheads buckling, an atmosphere venting into space through dozens of hull breaches. "Mum, we need to evacuate," her tactical officer urged, but Cross shook her head. "Negative. Signal the fleet all ships. Pattern Omega. Execute immediately." Pattern Omega was a doctrine that existed only in the darkest contingency plans of human military strategy. Every ship would overload its reactor simultaneously, creating a coordinated series of nuclear detonations designed to maximize damage to clustered enemy formations. It was essentially a fleet-wide suicide attack across the battlefield. Human captains received the order and began powering down their reactor safeties. Some hesitated for heartbeats, thinking of families back home, of lives unlived. But then they remembered Caius Vex's transmission, his defiant last stand against impossible odds. The Retribution was the first to go, its reactor containment failing in a burst of artificial sunshine that consumed everything within a 50-kilometer radius. The blast wave caught 3 Velthari ships, vaporizing their forward sections and sending the wreckage tumbling into their own formation. One by one, the human fleet transformed itself into a constellation of miniature stars. Each detonation claimed enemy vessels, but the cost was total. Not a single human ship survived the engagement. Admiral Kixthara stared at her tactical display in numb disbelief. Of her original 200 ships, only 87 remained functional. The humans had traded their entire fleet for a victory that, by any rational analysis, should have been impossible. But as she surveyed the wreckage-strewn battlefield, she realized something that chilled her to her core. The human fleet hadn't been trying to win a conventional victory. They had been sending a message to say message. Caius Vex had broadcast from her predecessor's flagship. Earth would not submit. Earth would not surrender. And if the Velthari wanted to conquer humanity, they would have to pay a price in blood that would bankrupt their entire civilization. In the expanding debris field that had once been the fleets, the only sound was the whisper of cooling metal and the fading echoes of human defiance. The Velthari High Command convened an emergency session aboard the orbital fortress Dominion's Edge, their mandibles clicking with barely controlled panic. The reports from Admiral Kixthara's shattered fleet had reached the homeworld within hours, spreading through their military hierarchy like a virus of doubt. "Impossible," High Commander Six Valen hissed, his aged carapace bearing the scars of a dozen conquered worlds. "No species has ever demonstrated such suicidal determination. The humans destroyed their entire fleet for a tactical victory that gains them nothing." Fleet Intelligence Chief Nixadera manipulated holographic displays showing casualty reports and tactical analyses. "Respectfully, High Commander, I believe we misunderstood the human objective. They weren't trying to win a space battle. They were demonstrating the cost of conquest." The assembled commanders fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had just announced, in terms written in the wreckage of 2 fleets, that they would make every engagement a Pyrrhic victory for their enemies. "The mathematical projections are troubling," Nixadera continued. "If every human engagement follows this pattern, the resources required to conquer their colonies would exceed our total military capacity by a factor of 12. But High Commander Six Valen had not conquered 43 worlds by accepting defeat. "That we don't conquer them, we exterminate them, launch the planet killers." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Planet-killer weapons were forbidden by galactic law, banned after the Kytherian Holocaust had rendered 17 worlds uninhabitable. Using them would mark the Velthari as a rogue species, subject to intervention by the Galactic Council. Sir, Intelligence Chief Nixadera clicked hesitantly. The diplomatic consequences are irrelevant. Sixvalent cut her off. The humans have demonstrated that conventional conquest is impossible. If we cannot rule them, we will erase them. Dispatch the World Breaker fleet to Sol system immediately. 3 days later, the most terrifying weapons in Velthari history emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 5 massive vessels, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust and boiling away its atmosphere. They were escorted by the remainder of Admiral Kixthara's fleet, reinforced with fresh ships and crew to bring their numbers back to full strength. But Earth had not been idle. In the 72 hours since the fleet engagement, humanity's industrial capacity had shifted into something resembling controlled madness. Every orbital foundry, every asteroid mining station, every colonial shipyard was working around the clock to produce weapons that had never been tested, and defenses that existed only in theoretical papers. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center buried 3 kilometers beneath Geneva, watching status reports stream in from across the solar system. Her predecessor, Helena Cross, was dead along with the entire home fleet. The responsibility for humanity's final stand now rested on her shoulders. Mum, Luna base reports ready, her communications officer announced. All mass drivers are charged and targeted on the approaching fleet. Chen nodded grimly. Luna's mass drivers were mining equipment, hastily converted to military use. They could accelerate chunks of asteroidal iron to near relativistic speeds, turning them into kinetic kill vehicles that no shield could stop. The problem was targeting space was vast, and even a planet-killer fleet was a tiny target at interplanetary distances. Mars Defense Command signals ready, came another report. Orbital mirror arrays are aligned and focusing. The mirrors were even more desperate improvisation solar collectors repurposed to focus the sun's energy into coherent beams. They had the power to crack small asteroids, but their effective range was laughably short in the context of space warfare. Admiral, her tactical officer said quietly, we should consider evacuation protocols. The civilian population goes nowhere. Chen cut him off. We learned from Caius Vex, from Helena Cross, from every human who's died fighting these bastards. We don't run, we don't hide. We make them pay for every meter of space they take. The Velthari fleet approached Earth's orbital plane with methodical precision, their planet-killer weapons charging with energies that could split continents. Admiral Kixthara had studied the human defensive positions and found them pathetically inadequate mining equipment and improvised energy weapons. Against the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, begin bombardment sequence, she ordered from the bridge of her flagship. Target the primary population centers first. I want the humans to watch their species die. But as the first planet-killer weapon discharged its devastating payload toward Earth's surface, something unexpected happened. The beam struck what appeared to be empty space and stopped, dispersed, absorbed by something the Velthari sensors couldn't identify. Report, Kixthara snapped. Unknown defensive system, Admiral. The humans appear to have deployed some form of energy dissipation field around their planet. Our weapons are being neutralized. What the Velthari didn't know was that humanity had taken everything they learned from captured alien technology and combined it with their own desperate innovation. The energy dissipation field was actually a network of modified quantum computers, each one running simulations that predicted incoming energy weapons and generated precisely tuned interference patterns. It was the collective processing power of humanity's entire digital infrastructure, turned into a planetary defense grid that existed as much in cyberspace as in physical reality. The first planet-killer shot had been stopped, but the network was already burning out from the strain. They might be able to deflect 2 or 3 more shots before the system collapsed entirely. All units, commence attack. Admiral Chen broadcast to every human vessel and installation in the solar system. Pattern Vex. No prisoners, no surrender, no mercy. The final battle for Earth began with Luna's mass drivers opening fire at maximum rate, filling space between the moon and the approaching fleet with relativistic projectiles. Most missed their targets, but those that didn't hit with the force of nuclear weapons, punching through Velthari shields and armor like bullets through paper. The orbital mirror arrays fired next, concentrating the sun's fury into beams that could melt battleship armor at close range. But the Velthari had learned from their previous encounters with human desperation. They dispersed their formation, denying the defenders concentrated targets while maintaining overwhelming firepower superiority. The second planet killer shot overwhelmed Earth's quantum defense grid, burning out processing nodes across 3 continents. The beam carved a molten scar across the Pacific Ocean, vaporizing billions of tons of seawater and creating a mushroom cloud visible from orbit. But instead of breaking human resolve, the near miss only seemed to enrage them further. All civilian vessels, all cargo haulers, all maintenance pods. Admiral Chen broadcast on every frequency, "You are now part of the defense fleet. Load up with whatever explosives you can find and ram the bastards. Make HFY proud." Across the solar system, humanity's civilian infrastructure transformed itself into a swarm of improvised weapons. Cargo vessels packed with nuclear waste and mining explosives. Passenger liners converted into kinetic kill vehicles. Even individual EVA suits. Their pilots volunteering for one-way missions. To plant demolition charges on enemy hulls. The Velthari found themselves fighting not just a military force, but an entire species that had chosen death before subjugation. Every human vessel that died took enemy ships with it, turning space around Earth into an expanding graveyard of twisted metal and cooling plasma. Admiral Kixthara watched her fleet's strength ebb away like blood from a mortal wound. For every human ship they destroyed, more seemed to take its place. The species' industrial capacity was producing weapons faster than she could destroy them, as if the entire solar system had become a single, vast war machine. High Command is demanding status reports, her communications officer reported. They want to know when Earth will be pacified. Kixthara looked at her tactical display, watching another wave of civilian vessels accelerate toward her formation on suicide runs. "Tell them," she said quietly, "that pacifying Earth may be impossible. The humans don't fight to win. They fight to ensure we can't win either." The third planet killer shot never fired, a converted luxury yacht, its hull packed with antimatter stolen from a research station, penetrated the weapon's defensive screen and detonated directly against the massive vessel's hull. The explosion consumed both ships in a brief new star, but it also eliminated 1/5 of the Velthari's world-ending capability. As the battle raged into its second day, a new factor entered the equation. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge, not human ships, but something else entirely. The distinctive engine signatures of the Galactic Council's peacekeeping fleet. The Velthari use of planet-killer weapons had been detected, monitored, and judged unacceptable by the galaxy's governing body, a force of over 300 ships from a dozen species was now approaching to enforce the weapons ban with overwhelming firepower. Admiral Kixthara faced a choice that would define her species' future: continue the assault on Earth and face intervention by the entire galactic community, or withdraw and accept that humanity had proven itself unconquerable through sheer, bloody-minded determination. She chose withdrawal, but not before sending one final transmission to the human defenders: "You have won this day, through madness and sacrifice, but know this, the Velthari remember. We will find another way to deal with your species, Admiral." Chen's response was broadcast on every frequency, ensuring that both the retreating Velthari and the approaching peacekeeping fleet would hear humanity's answer: "Let them come. We'll be waiting, and we'll teach them the same lesson we taught you, that some species are too dangerous to cage, too fierce to tame, and too stubborn to die quietly." As the Velthari fleet limped away from Earth's orbit, they left behind a solar system transformed by war, but not conquered. The humans had lost 60% of their orbital infrastructure and millions of lives, but they had also demonstrated something that would echo through galactic history. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Corporal HFY's name had become legend throughout human space. Monuments bearing his image stood on every colonized world, and military academies taught tactical courses called Vex protocols, the art of turning capture into psychological warfare. But perhaps the most fitting memorial stood in the ruins of Geneva's Military Command Center, where Admiral Sarah Chen kept her office despite having been offered more prestigious postings. On her desk sat a simple placard with words taken from his final transmission: "We are the apex predators of a world that tried to kill us for 4,000,000 years and failed." The galaxy had changed in the aftermath of humanity's impossible victory. The Galactic Council's peacekeeping intervention had not only stopped the Velthari assault, but had also granted Earth provisional membership in the Galactic Community of Recognition. That came with both privileges and responsibilities. Trade routes now connected human space to markets spanning dozens of star systems. Alien technologies flowed freely to Earth's colonies, while human innovations, particularly in the fields of adaptive psychology and defensive warfare, found eager buyers among species who had never considered that primitive minds might offer unique solutions to ancient problems. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in her laboratory aboard Lunar Research Station, studying neural interface technology that would have been impossible without the psychic feedback patterns recorded during HFY's interrogation. The irony was not lost on her that humanity's greatest breakthrough in consciousness studies had come from analyzing how a human mind could weaponize alien mind control. The test subjects are ready, Doctor, her assistant announced. The volunteers were all Marines, volunteers who had studied the Vex incident and understood its implications. They were testing the next generation of neural interface technology systems, designed not to control human consciousness, but to amplify it, to turn the chaotic, contradictory nature of human thought into a weapon that could adapt to any alien psychology. Begin the sequence, Dr. Vasquez ordered. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Velthari High Command was discovering the true cost of their failed conquest. The Galactic Council sanctions had crippled their economy, cutting off trade routes that had sustained their empire for centuries. Worse, the footage of HFY's last stand had been broadcast throughout known space, inspiring resistance movements on a dozen occupied worlds. High Commander Six-Valent stood before a holographic display, showing rebel activity across his empire. On Kepler 442b, the subjugated Thyakari had risen in open revolt, using improvised weapons and suicide tactics copied directly from human military doctrine. On Wolf 359c, the pacified Zalani had somehow acquired nuclear weapons and were threatening to detonate them in their own cities rather than submit to continued occupation. The humans have infected the galaxy with their madness, his intelligence chief reported. Their concept of acceptable casualties is spreading to our subject species. Every world we conquered through superior technology is now questioning whether death might be preferable to subjugation. Six-Valent's mandibles clicked with bitter irony. In attempting to study and conquer humanity, they had instead taught the galaxy humanity's most dangerous lesson, that some forms of resistance were more powerful than any weapon. What are our options? He asked. Diplomatic overtures to Earth, came the reluctant reply. The humans have made it clear they're willing to coexist peacefully with species that treat them as equals rather than subjects. They're even offering technological exchange programs. The thought of negotiating with the species he had tried to exterminate left a bitter taste in Six-Valent's chemical processors, but the mathematics were inescapable. Continued hostility with humanity would bankrupt his empire within a decade, while peaceful coexistence might offer a path to recovery. On Earth, Admiral Chen received the Velthari diplomatic overture with the same expression she might have worn while handling toxic waste, but she also understood the strategic value of turning enemies into reluctant allies. They want to establish trade relations, her aide reported. Exchange of technology and cultural information, the usual diplomatic framework. Chen studied the formal proposal, noting the careful language that avoided any mention of the previous conflicts. The Velthari were trying to pretend that the Battle of Sol had never happened, that the death of HFY and thousands of other humans was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Counter-proposal, she said finally, we'll consider trade relations after they've made reparations to the families of every human killed in their attacks. And we want a formal acknowledgement that their use of mind-control technology constituted a war crime under galactic law. It was a deliberate humiliation, forcing the proud Velthari to admit their failures in public, but it was also pragmatic humanity. Needed allies in a galaxy full of potential threats, and a chastened former enemy was often more reliable than an untested friend. The negotiations took months, but eventually the Velthari accepted terms that would have been unthinkable before. Their encounter with human stubbornness. They paid reparations, acknowledged their war crimes, and agreed to submit to regular inspections of their military facilities by joint human council teams. In return, humanity shared selected technologies and agreed to provide defensive military advisors to other species facing conquest by aggressive neighbors. The galaxy's newest member had become its most effective teacher of asymmetric warfare. On the anniversary of his death, Admiral Chen stood before HFY's memorial in Geneva, surrounded by diplomats and military officers from across known space. The simple stone monument bore no heroic poses or dramatic inscriptions, just his name, rank, and the dates of his service. But everyone present understood what it really represented, proof that a single individual's refusal to submit could change the course of galactic history. Corporal Vex died believing he was just buying time for Earth's defense. Chen said in her memorial address, he couldn't know that his sacrifice would teach the galaxy a lesson that would reshape interstellar relations for generations to come. She paused, looking out over the assembled crowd of beings from dozens of worlds. He showed us that true strength isn't measured in the size of your fleet or the power of your weapons. It's measured in your willingness to pay any price to remain free. That's the lesson humanity offers to the galaxy, not just how to fight, but why fighting sometimes becomes the only acceptable choice. As the memorial service concluded, delegates began making their way back to shuttles that would carry them to ships from 100 different worlds. But they all carried with them the same understanding that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, there were species willing to die rather than kneel, and that such determination was both humanity's greatest gift and most terrible warning. To the stars, the age of easy conquest was over. In its place had come an era where the cost of subjugation might exceed any possible benefit, where even the most advanced civilizations would have to think twice before trying to cage the apex predators that had evolved in the darkness between the stars. HFY had gotten his revenge after all, not just against his captors, but against the very concept of conquest itself. His smile, recorded in those final moments aboard the BlackHFY flagship, had become the expression of a species that refused to be anything but free. And in the depths of space, that smile still echoed through the void, a promise and a warning that would outlive empires.